Everybody, welcome back to the Inside Theater. My name is Lori Schwartz. I'm your host here for today, and we are going to get into a really exciting conversation with the fabulous Timothy Stevens, who's the global leader of strategic innovation for media, entertainment, and sports for Verizon. And we're going to dig into private networks and what that's all about, but really the opportunities and how it's impacting live broadcast and all the different exciting things that can happen in venue and some other insights as well. So let's have a big hand for Tim. Come on up, Tim. And we'll save some time for questions. All right. So Tim, first tell us about your role at Verizon.
Yeah, and listen, thank you very much for having me. This is
always
a pleasure to be here. So my team and I, we are all former media executives, 25, 30 years in the industry, running different broadcast-like operations. We're specifically, in a small team, but we're specifically brought into Verizon to actually be able to articulate what's going on in our portfolio, the Verizon portfolio, and then how does that relate to some of the challenges that are happening in the media space. And as we all are, we're all very much from a technology perspective. We're all technology investors. We're all trying to figure out how to solve a lot of different problems. And often, and it happens in every industry where industries get caught up in such their own jargon that it's almost hard to figure out, well, what are products and services. So we really come in and we understand the space and we can kind of dissect a little bit of that for it. And so on my team, we build innovations. We spend most of our time with spending a lot of time with clients and customers, figuring out what are they trying to solve for? How does our infrastructure really in 5G and everything that's going on out there really come together to meet some of those needs?
That's great. So it sounds to me like you have a fun job. But it's intense.
Yeah, it's intense.
It's intense. So last year was the first time that I ever heard about private networks or 5G private networks. Can you explain to everybody what that's about? And again, if you guys have questions, I'll definitely come into the audience for a portion of this. But
yeah, so I mean I'll take a half a step back. So 5G has been on this incredible marketing roll for a couple of years now. So everybody who's out there is 5G, 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 5G. It's hard to discern what's real and what's not real. And I would say in any hyper curve that's out there, we've gone through that first envelope where we've spoken about it, we've over marketed it, and now we're in that trough where now real products are coming out. And one of the key components around real products, and especially around private networks, is although 5G has been released as a consumer brand and it's out there in terms of infrastructure, and that's what you're experiencing as you walk through one of these events or you're out on the streets, one of the key components is how do I take that same technology and now I make it isolated and private, especially inside a venue. So what we've been doing, and we've done a lot of these projects, we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but I take the same infrastructure, except what I do is I take the radios, I take the core, I isolate them, so only devices that are signed to that core can actually integrate into or be part of that infrastructure. And the wonderful thing about it means that I can theoretically, or I can actually isolate workflows. So if you think about an untethered camera workflow, I'm not going out on the street, unless I'm a news gatherer, I'm not going out on the street where I am trying to actually broadcast or capture a piece of content. I can do that because I can dedicate a piece of bandwidth. I can dedicate a quality of service, QoS. I can isolate it in such a way that I can ensure that I'm getting low latency payload through whatever that workflow is, and all in a private infrastructure. So private networks are the next layer in terms of, really unleashing the power of 5G.
All right, and let's put this now inside of the sports broadcasting category, because if you do go to technology, media, content events all year long, sports broadcasting seems to be the one that's getting a lot of excitement right now because of first of all, people love sports, and it's the one area of live broadcast that still is getting advertiser dollars. Yep. But also there's so much engagement for fans now with what we might consider augmented reality, or even what people are talking about XR. But that's on the fan side. So let's talk about what you're doing in sports broadcasting for the people that are making the content.
Okay. So are any sports broadcasters out here at all? All right. So we'll go down.
That's a great question though. Let's just ask. So how many of you are content creators of some kind? Okay. Or equipment broadcasters, like broadcasters, equipment folks. Okay. Content folks, business people in the space. All right. Who are you?
Caterers. What else?
I know you've been asking yourself that question your whole life. I know I have too. All right. Well, we'll just jump right in. So talk to me about what you're doing with private networks in that sports broadcasting.
Yeah. So, and by the way, interesting that you talk about just sports in general, right? So I saw a statistic this morning that I was actually kind of surprised about. Maybe not completely. And we all know where the linear and streaming market is headed. And there was some piece of, there was just an anecdotal piece that talked about, and I don't know if it's 58% of customers are streaming, it was like 37, 38 are still doing traditional, linear broadcast content. But what it did say, and it was super interesting, is that on the linear side, or just in general, sports, 72% of the programming is in sports, and predominantly it's all linear. So what you're seeing is like this bifurcation of streaming services where you've got VOD assets and other than what Prime Video is doing with Thursday Night Football. But beyond that, still a lot is headed in traditional. And some of the things that happen, so if you've ever, and the reason I asked the question about is there anybody out here who's a sports broadcaster is because if you're a sports broadcaster or broadcasters broadcasting live, the amount of RF that you're dealing with when you go into a facility is extraordinary. I mean, the analysis of it, who's got it, who's using it, you're competing with not only the Wi-Fi, not only what we're doing in terms of public 5G, but you're competing with point of sale systems, you're repeating security systems, you're constantly, security, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you think about just the game itself, and this is how we kind of break it out. There's the integrity of the game. So how do you operate the game? How do you officiate it? How do you make sure that player health and safety is good? How do you create, coach to coach comms? I'll talk a little bit about that, but how do you create this like enclosed, isolated environment where I can continue to run my broadcast operation without having interference? And today, especially what's happening, it's not only inside the bowl, it's not only the management of all of that infrastructure and the management of the game, it's also the security between the opponent team and the home team, but it's also the incredible amount of cameras, IoT devices, media folks that are capturing, new types of content or whatever they're doing in terms of kind of just traditional media posting, that it's overwhelming. And then let's just walk outside the venue. And then outside the venue, you've got tailgaters, the truck company that's down the street, whatever else is happening. So all of this RF that's out there really creates an incredible chaotic environment for a programmer or a broadcaster to actually create and produce a program. So what we're doing right now, and we just released with the NFL our coach-to-coach comms, and this may seem like a really small thing, but it's the first step in that curve, right? So I talk about what the experience is and happening, what we're really doing. So coach-to-coach comms, I met with the NFL about a year and a half ago.
By the way, this is so cool. Like he's meeting with the NFL. You know what I'm saying? Like he's in the middle.
I'm right in the middle of the discussion. I think there was a certain amount of money that we actually gave the NFL for sponsorship that encouraged that meeting. So that worked out very well in our favor, putting that off to the side. So I met with them over a year and a half ago. And, we actually did a workshop. I will tell you there's probably 8 to 10 really significant work streams that came out of it that really opened my eye about what was happening inside a sports venue, inside what was going on in terms of broadcast and broadcast operations. And we focused in on coach to coach comms and coach to player comms. As I charted through this, we spent probably an hour and a half just talking about that piece. There were 30 to 40 nuances that I never considered when I was just thinking about, okay, what happens when you're actually trying to do this or articulate or execute a game? And there's all kinds of things like, I don't know if people know when a coach is talking to the quarterback, that at 15 seconds before the clock expires, that communication stops. He can no longer talk, right? They can't hear a lot of times because the crowd roar is so overwhelming that and that's why they're sitting there. I don't know what to play. I'm going to call on my own. So we went through an analysis of all different types of architecture, and we built for them this coach-to-coach system. It is virtually zero latency. I could be, if you've ever talked to anybody on the phone and you're standing next to somebody who's talking, you could actually hear the delay, right? There's quite a bit of delay. I could be right next to you in this system. You could be talking right out loud. We have no delay. So that's first. Second, it's built to be able to withstand 100 decibels of noise. So the noise reduction in it is unimpacted by what's going on in the arena. The coach-to-coach comms allows them to, whether the head coach is talking to the offensive coach or the defensive coach, it becomes clear, it's pristine, it's isolated 100% by team, right? So one team cannot, which they never had before, one team has no access to, because it's two different, essentially, cores or two different frequencies that we're running on. Now, that we tested last year, we released this year. You're going to see it in every game. So in every game this year, they're using that coach-to-coach comms. They'll be moving that to coach-to-player. But what's beautiful about it is, because we're using that same infrastructure for what was like a simple task, it's actually, what I would consider kind of our Trojan horse to start the next thing. We brought it down to Formula One. We had the race teams using it so they get a sense of what was going on. And then within that, we actually released a bunch of camera guys with right now it's a tethered belt pack, right? Or it's an untethered belt pack, but it's like a sidecar that's connected directly into our 5G infrastructure. Now, I don't know if you know, but a lot of times what's happening in the background, and there's actually a funny story, and I'll tell you that in a second, but what's happening in the background is when you have, photographers running around capturing information, a lot of times they all go to, because there's no uncharted RF allowed inside the stadium. They actually have to go with their SIM or with their card, right, whatever their media card is, the SD card, and find a spot where they can actually upload the photograph that they just took. It's not allowed. So in fact, the funny story is, I won't tell you who the coach is, but you'll figure it out. He was trying to communicate with somebody on field. Some photography group had come in and they were using some RF that had missed in terms of the spectrum analysis. And whatever they were using as RF to transport the content out interfered with the coach being able to communicate to his player. And this particular coach, you'll figure out who it is. So went right back to the league and said, look, I want a yellow line painted all the way around, which now you'll see, a yellow line painted all the way around my player area where I am, and no outside folks are allowed to enter that space. Now, I will tell you, he also did not want that to happen on the opponent's side. He just wanted to make sure his side was completely secure. So we sent a bunch of these photographers with F1. They were uploading in milliseconds, just stills from all around the stadium. And when I tell you, like, everybody was really excited about the fact, okay, now we're moving media. So the next layer here is now these untethered cameras, right? How do we get that? How do I get the pylon camera that I'm moving from yardage to yardage untethered to be able to drive that video back, right? So you can capture it. How do I do, the roaming cameras that we want out there? NFL films are always capturing what's happening behind in the scenes, right? So how do we get these guys untethered to do what they need to do? And that's kind of the next layer. And then how do we get the manufacturers also to start building native in the equipment 5G? That's where you start to think about the power of 5G and the private infrastructure. That's where it starts to come together.
So, and you're really talking about scenarios specifically in sports, but you can see this being lifted into any content category, really. Are there other categories coming to you now asking for help or wanting to explore this?
Well, one of the things that we're actually trying to crack the code on is, what's going on inside the studio space. The studio space is kind of easy to I can map it out. Do I have the requirement for untethered cameras? I know I have communication requirements. I'm thinking probably the next place is, when you're doing theatrical, when you're doing, principal photography, right? Can I stand up a private network at a remote location where now I've got a full crew that's attached to that private network? And then if you're thinking about how do I get stills, how do I get dailies, how do I get et cetera out?
So being able to really truly do remote production, upload to the cloud, look at dailies right when they're happening, all these things that are now becoming, since COVID, really a demand, but you have to be plugged in somewhere. So you're saying now that same concept of private networks will now light that up on fire.
Yeah. And look, at the end of the day, the key, if I was to say there's three really important keys. I've got an isolated network that I can do anything with. So I'm not competing with the public network. That's one key component. When you think about the workflows in general, because the workflows are so intense, and for the most part, our public infrastructure is really built for downloads. It's not built for uploads. So I want to make sure that I have the right upload capability so I can get pieces out. So it's a how do I design a system? How do I isolate it from the public and what's going on? And then if I start to, and the future 5G is slicing, but if I start to slice up pieces, then I can also do things that I can isolate workflows that only have very specific requirements. When I want to do a higher payload, if I want to do an SRT feed, and I can do that at X amount of megs depending on what I'm configured to, I want that to be untethered completely and without any interference, and I want to make sure I can get it where I need to get it. And that presents the opportunity to really manage very differently how you're managing your workflows today.
So I could see this for obviously reporters in the middle of war zones, not that, we want that to happen, but all these people that are out there, capturing what's happening in the real world live. Anything live could really be lit up this. Now, you were also telling me, and again, we don't think about this, but in venues, all the other places this is activating. So as a consumer, I go out and I'm missing a play because I'm online at the concession stand. Tell me how some of this is lighting up those experiences.
Yeah, so we're also looking at private networks as a way of delivering, I'll call it IPTV, and a 5G delivery mechanism. And the thought or the concept, and this is where I get to innovate and play, right? But the thought or the concept around it is that and there's a bunch of services, inside a venue that a venue owner wants to make sure are still operating very efficiently, right? And one of them obviously is food and beverage. So I get out of my chair, I go and, I'm standing in front of the kiosk, which right now that sign has the menu board on it. And all of a sudden I hear a roar going on behind me, and my natural inclination is to run up to the opening just to see what happens. Well, in an IPTV, 5G private network scenario, I take over every screen. I show the play that's going on the floor, and then I recapture it and put it back to wherever. So what I get is now I get to first homogenize the operations of every piece of screenware that's in the venue. And once I do that, I can do everything from wayfinding, menu boards, what's happening, advertising, et cetera, et cetera. The important part here, though, is it's got to be, again, untethered, because the reality is, and we saw this at F1, right? I'm able to stand up, right? I have a very specific, like this space right here. Hey, we want to make sure that we put a security gate right here. I can do that untethered. I can put a security gate. It's connected to the system, 5G. If you don't have the right credential, you're not getting through, right? So if you start to think about that, especially when you have large events. I've got an event, I've got a Super Bowl, I've got some large event where now the experience is extended out to the parking lot. Well, I'm not cabling the parking lot. That's not happening. Or I need very specific locations where I'm standing up signage. That's not happening. But with 5G and private networks, now I can start to create an environment that can expand and move and really conform to whatever the event is. And that's another game changer. All super low latency, all being able to deliver. Naturally I still need power. Okay, power, but that's all I need. I don't have to have other infrastructure.
It blows my mind away. All right. So let's talk just on the consumer side.
Yeah.
Because you can start to see how there's this real demand post-COVID for experiences, to provide consumers with experiences. So let's go to the sports category. A lot of the discussion around what's going to happen in venues is that I'm going to be able to have a very personalized experience as a fan. What is some of this, if we drip now to the C part of B2B2C, what's going to happen potentially for that C?
So, complete transparency, it's going to be a challenge. And it's a challenge for a lot of reasons, right? One, you walk into a venue, I can put a private network up that's a Verizon public private network. And I'll talk about how I would address my consumers. but I'm not going to be able to address every consumer. So if you're in the venue and you're not a Verizon subscriber, perhaps you're not going to get that experience, right?
All right. So this would only be available if you are holding a Verizon device.
That's right. Right.
Not very nice of you.
That's right. Well, I mean, that's the reality of they call that business.
Yeah.
But we're also looking at, because the reality is that our customers don't want it to be an isolated experience either, right? So we're also looking at how do we approach like a multi-carrier delivery of that type of thing. The real challenge that comes into play is that if I set up a private network, and that private network is delivering a very specific experience for a Verizon, and we'll just leave it as a Verizon customer for the moment. In order for you to be on that network, I have to have your SIM card. I have to have your IMEI or whatever but that's where my technology just goes up. I like all the, I don't know what those numbers or letters mean, but I know I need it. So I need to register that phone on that core in order for you to have that experience. So to do that, what we're experimenting with are things like you come up with your phone, here's a QR code, you do the QR code, I turn around, I register, I geofence it, you come in, and then you can have that experience for a period of time. And then after the experience is complete, you're pushed out of the core, right? So we don't capture any other information. We just align you so that you're part of that core. So those are the types of things that we can start to do. And when you do that, today, and I'm sure you know the experience here today, inside a venue, the way most public radio systems are set up, so most public 5G, 4G, all of it, it's mostly download, right? Which doesn't work at a Taylor Swift concert, because at the end of the day, all they're trying to do is stream back to their fans and friends that, hey, I'm here at Taylor Swift.
Right, right.
And there's only this much, it's a quarter of the bandwidth. There's a percentage of the bandwidth that's only dedicated to upload. So that becomes a challenge. And it's the same challenge on the private networks. If I want to create an experience, I have to figure out how do I manage the radios in a way that we've identified what the experience is. We know what the requirements are from an upload and download perspective, and we create something uniquely different. And we play with a lot of this stuff. I will tell you, most of the venue owners, and I'll tell you where it works, but most of the venue owners are kind of like, hey, I don't want anybody doing anything but watching the game. That's what they paid for. So unless it's something extraordinary, it doesn't work. F1 works. I can only sit at one turn, but the other 18 that are going on, if I have a device where I can all of a sudden see what's happening, that's great. Golf, it works. I'm going to park myself at the par 3, but I want to know what's happening here, 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 and here. So there are certain applications that it works very well with, but other applications, we're still, again, kind of learning, what is the best experience that the venue's looking for.
Do I have any questions from the audience? Anybody? Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Let me come out there, and then we'll do a little Phil Donahue.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's the right.
Oh, well, whoever is the current popular person, because I find that I date myself a lot, and I'm a great date, but when I bring up my case studies.
Thank you. Hey, Tim, thanks for the insight. Really appreciate it. Obviously, we've been following 5G pretty closely, and to your point, it maybe hasn't rolled out as quickly as we'd anticipated. But just going back to the venue model and setting up private networks, what is the kind of business case and the ROI that you're offering to set these networks up?
Yeah. So, and honestly, it varies by use case, right? We did it's not a venue, but I'll give you a quick example. So we did the British ports, last year. And if you know anything about a port operation, you have a number of containers coming in. There's a customs piece over. There's a lot of security around it. A lot of those operations are very manual. And so we set up a private network inside that envelope, geofenced it. And what we found is first they were just trying to track containers, right? Where was everything? And now they kept on growing layer by layer by layer. The investment is you at the end of the day, you have to, and it's different everywhere, right? So you have to, obviously you have to acquire the radios and the equipment, from a core perspective. And in some cases you have to acquire the spectrum. Certainly in Europe, the owner of the spectrum is not the telco. It's actually the individual company that's purchasing the spectrum, and they have a defined location that they're working within. Otherwise what we're seeing, and I think the NFL piece is a good example, right? We're standing that up. That was an investment that they felt required to make. The prior environment was all tethered. It was aging out, at this point, and it really wasn't providing the kind of flexibility that they needed, and it became kind of a growth pull. I can tell you, my understanding is that in itself was enough of an ROI for them, and now we're going to continue to add to it. The good thing is that there's a number of manufacturers that are out there that are manufacturing radios that we're working with. We work very closely with them. The core components are continuing to drop. I just saw the latest stack, and when I tell you the latest stack, the core is a 1 RU unit. And then we're introducing edge compute into that environment too, so you can do other things, right? And that's typically another 1 RU. And then we've got a switching fabric that we're connecting to all the radios. So there is an investment that needs to be made. But I think if you could start to think about all of the RF that's going on in your environment and the RF that you want to make sure you want to manage, you're going to find very quickly that ROI is going to pay itself off very quickly.
More questions for Tim? Anybody? Tim, just as we're wrapping up, could you explain edge computing? And you taught me about MEC last year, but can you explain what that means to everybody?
Yeah. So, one of the principles of 5G, in general, don't think about it as a mobility, standard. Think about it as the 5th generation of network design, because that's really what it is. The 5th generation of network design introduces compute inside the transport fabric, right? And the one thing that you have to start to think about, so in a traditional kind of I'll call it a cloud-based environment, you make a request, the request goes to wherever your cloud environment is, it comes back, and you've established this kind of peer-to-peer relationship. With 5G, what you're really looking to do is to take that same experience and break it up into multiple different compute statements. So if I'm doing a AR VR experience, I may log in at the most secure cloud base, but down that kind of transport lane, I'll render locally, and my activity may happen on my device. And what I'm doing is I'm decoupling the entire software stack, and I'm putting compute where I've got variables that need to be executed closest to the experience. So I kind of walk backwards from a latency. So you have to really start to think differently about how you build experiences and how you actually create, in this case, or do software development at the end of the day. Think about it as segments and latency and where you want the experience to occur. And that's where the power really of 5G comes into play. It's the compute coupled with the transport that really makes a difference.
And the truth is that as we're moving into the future and we do get into more spatial computing and everything with all these headsets that are finally lighting up and more heavy content, more broadband intensive content, we're going to need to figure all of this out. Right?
Oh, 100%. You're going to want to take full advantage of the fact that you've got compute. I theoretically, I can have compute right here, right? So I can be rendering something in real time, right here inside the space. And that's what you want to start to think about. That is really the power of 5G.
Yeah, I would love to have good Wi-Fi everywhere I go, but I guess that's a different thing. Before we say goodbye to Tim, any other questions for Tim before we go? All right. So if we want to find out more about private networks and all the things that are being rolled out, because obviously this is iterative, as you solve for more of these pipelines that you were just mentioning, you're going to be publishing more of this information. But where can people learn more about this?
So if you just go to the Verizon website, so Verizon.com, you'll see there is a section that's very specifically dedicated to media and entertainment solutions. If you go there, that'll get routed to me somehow, hopefully. And we're happy to work with everybody and figure out what the next way to, what the next use case is, where can we go with 5G, especially for the media and entertainment space.
Yeah, and the truth is that a lot of other business categories that wouldn't be considered media entertainment are now becoming publishers and will need these same concepts too.
At the end of the day, video is still, I think the statistic that's out there, 70% of the traffic that's on the internet is video. So everybody is publishing at the end of the day. So,
and if you just have an idea that you're trying to see if it works, they can reach out to you potentially. I'll give them your mobile phone number.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Let's have a big hand for Timothy Stevens from Verizon Media and getting the scoop on private networks. Thanks, everybody. We'll be back at 2:15 with another great session here in the Insight Theater, technology decision-making in an evolving news and media landscape. So come on back, 2:15. Thanks so much, everybody.